Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1087 for December 15th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
It's a very pleasant surprise. You're up against every distillery in Scotland, essentially, so it's a real honour to be picked as Distiller of the Year for Scotland this year.
That's Holyrood Distillery co-founder Rob Carpenter. His upstart distillery was named Distiller of the Year last week in Whisky Magazine's Icons of Whisky Awards for Scotland. I'll talk with Rob later on WhiskyCast In-Depth about what makes Holyrood unique and share tasting notes for two of Holyrood's releases in the What I'm Tasting This Week department. That's just ahead, along with Behind the Label and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
The second release in Dewar's four-part collector series, Dewar's Double Double 38-Year-Old, is now available. It's a tribute to the Scottish Highlands, and it's like nothing you've had before. More in a minute.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. After a decade of lobbying from American Single Malt producers, the Treasury Department's Tax and Trade Bureau has finally ratified the definition for American Single Malt whiskeys. The news came on Friday in an early morning phone call from TTB Administrator Mary Ryan to American Single Malt Whiskey Commission Executive Director Steve Hawley.
Yeah, funny enough, Mary from TTB said, I always forget that not everybody's on Washington, D.C. time. So I was asleep this morning when she tried to reach me, and I got up and called her back, and she gave me the good news that ratification was on its way.
What does this mean?
It means so much, Mark. It's validation first and foremost. It means that we have protections in place. It means that, our government is behind us in supporting the category and the distillers that make single malt in this country. It means hopefully a boon to business for everyone, as a lot more eyeballs and a lot more interest comes to the category. It just means so much.
You got pretty much everything you wanted, didn't you?
We did. From the start, we thought it was important that the definition for single malt be drafted by the people that make single malt. And that's why we sat down in 2016 to do that. And we were really happy to see not only that the definition was adopted according to what we wanted it to be defined as, but also kind of the really thoughtful response from TTB to a lot of the questions that they posed as part of their rulemaking process, but also that people have been asking for the better part of 9 years now. So, it was really heartening to see that, what we petitioned for is actually what's going to go into the regulations.
The new standard will officially be published in the Federal Register this coming Wednesday and take effect on January 19th. It requires American single malt whiskeys to be made from 100% malted barley at a single distillery, but gives maximum flexibility to distillers in other areas. For instance, they'll be allowed to use either new or used barrels for maturation, either pot or column stills, and there's no minimum aging time required, although the usual standard of 2 years will be required for so-called straight single malts. The use of caramel coloring will be allowed, but in a first for the agency, the rules require that the use of caramel coloring be disclosed on the label. Gareth Moore of the Virginia Distillery Company calls the ruling a landmark decision for the whiskey industry.
Well, it's a huge watershed moment. I really think for the category, because for the first time, we're recognized not as a subset of miscellaneous whiskey, but we're elevated to the defined heights of bourbon and rye and Scotch on the global stage. And so this recognition really proves that the category has a lot of momentum, it has a lot of followers, it has a lot of suppliers, and it has a lot of innovation. And I think with this recent announcement, it has even more room for growth.
How so?
Well, when we think about the impact directly in the industry, I think it hits, distributors, retailers, and consumers alike. From the the distribution perspective, as the industry is obviously facing some volume headwinds, innovative categories like American Single Malt are continuing to grow. Now as a category, we'll have Nielsen and IWSR track that growth and be able to show, kind of a bright spot in the industry. From the retail perspective, this is a battle that we've been facing for years of, where do we put it on the shelf? An American Single Malt doesn't really fit in the World Whiskey section or in the Scotch section or in the bourbon section. But now that we're ratified, the TTB has made this announcement, makes it a lot easier. And we've been working with a large chain that has basically said, yes, we'll create a category on the shelf for American Single Malt, but not until the TTB actually ratifies the category. And then from the consumer perspective, it's really about awareness. And certainly the press that's surrounding this announcement will be great for the industry, for wider distribution and for getting recognition on shelf sets so consumers can find us. We're excited to bring our products not only to the U.S., but to consumers around the world who now understand what the category is and have an opportunity to try it.
The TTB essentially gave the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission exactly what it was looking for.
They did. And, I really think that's a result of getting the industry to coalesce around a definition that is, in line with the global standards of single, meaning one distillery, malt referring to malted barley, but at the same time, leaving enough room for plenty of innovation. So not having restriction around, certain cask types or certain still types, or specifics around aging requirements. And so I think it was really the industry coming together to go to the TTB and say, hey, we're all on the same page here, right? There's not a lot of competition between us in terms of competing definitions. And I think that was key to the success getting this ratified, is that the TTB saw that we were very unified and gave us this great news yesterday.
Around 200 distilleries are already making some form of American Single Malt. Most meet the new requirements, but those that don't will have a 5-year grace period to come into compliance. Turning from American Single Malt to bourbon now, Kentucky's bourbon distillers set new records for production during 2023. For the first time since records have been kept, distillers filled more than 3 million barrels of bourbon during the year and now have 14.3 million barrels maturing in the state's rickhouses. The records come at a time when the state's bourbon industry is starting to get a bit nervous about the threat of tariffs on whiskey exports. Here's Eric Gregory of the Kentucky Distillers Association.
We certainly do have a lot of new production still coming online in Kentucky. There are several distilleries that have been announced that are still under construction and won't open for a couple of years. I think the thing that concerns us the most right now is a lot of the production that's been built in the last 10 years has been for global growth. And with the return of possible new tariffs and retaliatory tariffs on American whiskey and Kentucky bourbon, that's just, it's just a disaster waiting to happen.
How so?
Well, with all this global growth going on and the amount of inventory that we have, we lost a tremendous amount of sales during the last time that tariffs took place. So we were growing exports at a clip of about 150% from 2009 through 2017. And from 2018, when the retaliatory tariffs were enacted, through 2023, when they were delayed, we not only lost that 150% growth, we went down 20%. So, that is, not good at all. And that's at 25% tariffs. When you're looking at a 50% tariff coming in March from the EU, typically our largest export market, that would be a crippling blow to Kentucky bourbon's exports. And, a lot of distilleries that have built for that growth and a lot of new distilleries that are looking to get into the export markets are just going to, have all sorts of problems.
Gregory also cites the impact of changing consumer trends and the snowballing state barrel taxes on maturing inventory as headwinds the industry has to face right now. The incoming Trump administration's threat to impose import tariffs on all imported wines and spirits could cost the American economy thousands of jobs. That's according to the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America, which released a new economic study on the impact of tariffs this week. The study found that a 20% tariff could cost the industry around 60,000 jobs nationally, with a loss of $2.9 billion in tax revenue. Those tariffs would be paid by importers, who would pass the higher costs down the line to wholesalers, retailers, and eventually consumers. The nation's largest wholesaler, Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits, is being sued by the Federal Trade Commission for anti-competitive pricing practices. At issue is discounts Southern Glazer's offered illegally to large buyers that it didn't offer to independent retailers. That violates the Robinson-Patman Act, which requires discounts be available equally to large and small retailers. Southern Glazer's has denied any wrongdoing. In other news, the James B. Beam Distilling Company is adding a private barrel club for consumers for the first time. Until now, Beam's private barrel picks have only been available to retailers and bars. The Beam Private Barrel Club will give individuals wishing to buy a barrel of whiskey a chance to be master distiller for a day, according to Beam's Alex Bowie.
I think the fact that it's going to be more of a club than just a come and buy a barrel from us, I think the fact that you're going to actually join a club, a community, and that there'll be things beyond, yes, the great experience that you're going to get when you come down here as a consumer, the fact that you're going to get to select a unique barrel. But beyond that, there'll be ongoing things that will actually live past that experience, past you receiving that barrel, which I think is going to be a little bit unique to barrel programs that we'll be bringing out. And that will be growing as it continues to move forwards.
The program will start off offering barrels of Knob Creek bourbon and rye, but other Beam brands will be added as time goes on. Buyers will have to visit the distillery in Claremont, Kentucky at least twice, once to pick the barrel and the second time to pick up the bottled whiskey in person. Buffalo Trace and the Van Winkle family have unveiled this year's Van Winkle Whiskey Collection. There's more Pappy 20 and 23-year-old bourbon available this year than in previous years. Suggested retail prices range from $129.99 for the Old Rip Van Winkle 10-year to $449.99 for the Pappy 23-year-old. And as always, the Van Winkle family and Buffalo Trace remind everyone that they have no control over what retailers actually sell bottles for. Heaven Hill has released the fall 2024 edition of Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond. This release is 11 years old and was distilled in the fall of 2013. It carries a recommended retail price of $154.99 a bottle. Woodford Reserve is out with its annual release of Woodford Reserve Batch Proof. This year's batch comes from more than 100 barrels blended together and was bottled at 59.75% ABV or 119.5 proof. It's available in limited amounts with a suggested retail price of $149.99 a bottle. And finally, Ken Lewis of New Riff Distilling has been named chairman of the Kentucky Distillers Association, while Helen Mulholland of Sazerac, Ireland, becomes the first woman to chair the Irish Whiskey Association. And former Embra Distillery executive Matt McKay has been named the new managing director and whiskey maker for the London Distillery Company. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts has a Whiskey Wednesday tasting with the Dalmore this Wednesday night. The Scotch Whisky Experience in Edinburgh, Scotland, has its annual Distillers Fair coming up on the 29th and 30th. After the new year, the Harrow Whisky Festival kicks off the year on January 10th and 11th in London, while the Arctic Whisky Festival takes place in Tromsø, Norway on the 11th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Dewar's Double Double 38-year-old is the second release in a 4-part limited edition collector series honoring Scotland's most legendary whiskey regions. This rare blended malt, a tribute to the Upper Scottish Highlands, is crafted from nearly 4-decade-old Highland and Islay whiskies. It undergoes Dewar's unique 4-stage aging process with a final finish in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks from the prestigious Royal Brackless Single Malt. The finish invites you to explore your own tasting notes, but for me, there's incredible depth, with rich layers of vanilla, toasted cereals, dried figs, plums, dark chocolate, and a subtle hint of Islay smoke, all beautifully balanced. To truly elevate this tasting experience, renowned chef Gabriel Cruther, in collaboration with Dewar's, has created an exclusive selection of custom chocolates. Crafted from the world's finest ingredients, each piece is infused with a few precious drops of Dewar's Double Double 38-year-old whiskey, making this a luxurious and unforgettable pairing. Now available, this exquisite pairing of whiskey and chocolate promises to deliver an unforgettable experience. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Dewar's is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 48.8% alcohol by volume.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. When Holyrood Distillery opened in the heart of Edinburgh in 2019, it was the first distillery in modern times in the Scottish capital. The distillery released its first single malt last year and was named Distiller of the Year last week in Whisky Magazine's Scottish Icons of Whisky Awards. Co-founder Rob Carpenter has been part of the Holyrood story since the beginning, and I talked with him this week on a Zoom call. So let's start off with the Distiller of the Year honors in the Icons of Whisky Awards for Scotland. That's had to have come as a big surprise to you.
Well, it's a very pleasant surprise. You're up against every distillery in Scotland, essentially. So it's a real honor to be picked as Distiller of the Year for Scotland this year.
What does it mean to a small distillery like Holyrood to be honored like this?
It really means that we're doing something that is interesting to not only the judges but the public, because I think if we weren't getting some really good feedback on our liquid, we weren't getting good feedback on our brand, on the brand home and how we treat our guests, etc. All those things come together in that kind of award, I think. So it means we're doing something right.
You also won a World Whiskies Award for Embra for no age statement Scotch Lowlands whiskey for the best Scotch Lowlands whiskey with no age statement. What does that mean when you win an award like that?
Well, I mean, we're really pleased with Embra, and Embra is part of our really approach to whiskey. Arrival was our inaugural whiskey out in October of last year. Embra followed that in spring of 2024. And it really was a message in terms of what Holyrood is about. We are not going to release the same kind of flavor profile from Holyrood. We're not going to do age statements. We're going to forge our own path. And so having that recognition for Embra is really, really important. We're very proud of the liquid.
You also have Embra, which did not win an award, but tell me about that one.
Well, Embra is our third release. It came out in the late summer this year. Amber's very, very interesting. I've got a little card here I'll show. So, I mean, I'm sure your viewers will have a hard time reading that, but that's the malt recipe that goes into Embra. It's the different malts, different yeasts. And again, I mean, that's really what we're about. And in terms of innovation, experimentation, and trying to create delicious spirit before we put it into cask.
It really is an unusual philosophy, isn't it?
It is a bit different. I've heard for years, as I'm sure you have, that casks create 70%, 80%, it depends on who you talk to, of, the flavor in a whiskey. And that's not true. And it's been proven time and time again. Different malts have different impacts. Different yeasts have different impacts. And that's really what Holyrood is about. We're about not using the least expensive inputs in terms of malt and yeast that we can. We give up a bit of efficiency, but we gain so much in flavor and taste and spirit quality as far as we're concerned before that spirit goes into cask. And then you've got all those kinds of other cask things that you can do in terms of what cask you mature your spirit in, how you might re-rack it, etc. It gives you a lot more tools to play with.
How do you play with those tools?
We pick different malts. We're very much sort of led by the beer industry. Edinburgh was a big beer city back in the day, and it still is a beer city. There's lots of great small breweries there that are doing really interesting things. And there's, in the beer industry, those breweries are using all kinds of specialty yeast. They're using crystal malts and amber malts and chocolate malts, et cetera, to create those different flavors in beer. Whiskey is no more, in a simplified way, than distilled beer. So if you can create those different flavors right up front in your mashing process, and then play with them even more in your fermentation process by applying different yeasts, then you're going to create some delicious new make spirit. And I think we've proven that because we've won new make spirit awards. We've sold lots of new make spirit to people who come through and go, I've tried new make spirit before, and it's always pretty raw. But our new make spirit is drinkable on its own, frankly.
What does the future hold for Holyrood?
Well, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We've got more releases planned for next year. We're going to have a couple more what we call flagship releases. So those are releases like Embra and Ambir, sort of 8,000, 9,000 bottle releases. We've got some really interesting things coming up in terms of some flavor exploration that we've been doing. We'll continue to do single cask because we do those from time to time as well. And again, those are different from our flagships. And so we're just going to keep doing more of the same.
How do you define commercial success for Holyrood?
Well, commercial success is, first of all, going to be getting to profitability. We all know that the whiskey sector and spirits sector in general this year has been challenged. So we might have to put that aspiration off for another year or so. We're not a big distillery. We're 240,000 liters a year. We think there's a market for what we're doing. We're getting lots of great brand engagement and consumer feedback from people who are trying the liquid and learning about Holyrood. And so we're just going to keep, building that brand. And hopefully in a couple of years, when we have more volume out in the market, we can expand the export markets that we're selling into.
You're selling into the United States now. Are you worried about tariffs? Well,
I think if you're in the Scotch whiskey sector, you're always going to be paying attention to tariffs and so on. We're a pretty small player at this point in the U.S. Obviously, we'd hope to be larger. It's a terrific market, and there's lots of really interested and knowledgeable whiskey connoisseurs in the U.S. So we'd love to be a big part of that market to the extent we can. We'll see what tariffs bring, if they do bring. It would be unfortunate, I think, if that happened, but the spirits industry has survived that before and will survive it again.
Are you worried about overcapacity in the Scotch whiskey industry?
Not particularly. I think there are the big players who have a lot of capacity, but I think there's lots of room for the small guys who are doing their own thing. We are not competing against capacity. That's not what Holyrood is about. We never set out to make the cheapest liquid. And I don't say that in any kind of derogation of quality. I just mean we don't have the most efficient process. We're small. We use more expensive materials to do what we do. So we were never going to play in that capacity market anyways. We are going to try to carve out our own niche. And I think there will be a place for distilleries that can carve out that unique niche for themselves, even if the market is in a bit of a challenging position right now.
You'll find a link to the Holyrood Distillery website in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. And thanks to Rob Carpenter for joining us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Oban, a deliciously smooth single malt known for its coastal charm and highland heritage, loved by whiskey lovers worldwide. Discover Oban's full lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with Holyrood's Embra, which won the World Whiskies Award for Best No-Age Statement Lowlands Malt last week as well. It's bottled at 43.6% ABV, and the nose has a gentle smokiness with touches of dried flowers, honey, and brown sugar. The taste has a peaty touch along with honey, heather, and dried flowers, and the finish is long and smoky. I'm scoring the Holyrood Embra a 93. Holyrood's Embra, on the other hand, is a complete contrast. It's bottled at 49.8% ABV. The nose is fruity and floral with touches of peaches, pears, garden herbs, honey, and vanilla. The taste is syrupy thick with notes of white pepper, peaches, pear candies, and dried flowers. The finish is long with a kick of spice, and I'm scoring the Holyrood Embra a 93. Now let's look at the Dalmore's annual vintage-dated 15-year-old. This one from 2009. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has touches of caramel candy, Christmas cake, honey, and vanilla. The taste has notes of Christmas cake, a touch of rum, soft spices, plums, and raisins. The finish is long with touches of raisins and plums, and I'm scoring the Dalmore 2009 vintage 15-year-old single malt a 93. Let's wrap up with an American single malt from the Virginia Distillery Company. Its Cabernet cask finish is bottled at 46.5% ABV, and the nose has touches of red grapes, plums, blackberry jam, and honey. The taste has a nice red wine influence along with plums, blackberry jam, and a touch of oak tannins. The finish is long with subtle spices, and I'm scoring the Virginia Distillery Company's Cabernet cask finish a 92. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,800 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com. Let's open up the inbox now and see what people are talking about this week. Had this comment from Scott Rogers on last week's interview with Waterford Distillery founder Mark Rainier, who's hoping to raise enough money from investors to buy the distillery out of receivership next month. Here's what Scott had to say. Mark, thank you for this week's episode and your interview with Mark Rainier. You did a great job in a circumstance that most journalists only dream of, given how easy it is for execs of failing and failed businesses to just avoid the press. But I'm left wondering about his other business in Grenada, the Renegade Rum Distillery. I've heard mixed things from folks on island about whether that business is still a going concern or not, and that leaves me wondering what, if any, impact Renegade might have on Rainier's seemingly quixotic effort to buy Waterford's capital stocks. Well, thanks for your kind words, Scott. As for Renegade Rum, the distillery in Grenada went into receivership earlier this year and is no longer operating. Lots of comments on the TTB's move to create a standard of identity for American single malt whiskeys, including this comment on Facebook from our good friend, whiskey writer Lou Bryson. Of course they did, right after I submitted finals on my American whiskey manuscript. Damn their eyes. Leon at Malt Mariners posted this comment in the WhiskyCast community app. So if I read this correctly, there currently is no regulation of a minimum age of American single malt whiskey. Is that correct? Sounds like they still will only have the straight edition rule of minimum of 2 and 4 years if not stated. I'm quite happy about the development of the TTB because American single malts are such a great category and deserve to be recognized and protected as such. I feel a minimum age would be important to hold its own against Scotch, Irish, and Japanese. And Christopher Glenn responded with this comment, I believe the American Single Malt avoided a minimum age statement due to climate variabilities between Texas and Washington as an example. I'd rather a 3-year minimum be enacted, but some of those Texas malts don't need much more than 2. Virginia might need 4. Pacific Northwest might do well with more. All this is a disjointed way of defending not having a minimum age. If you have a take on this or anything else whiskey-related, we'd love to hear it. Download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You'll find it in your app store. You can also reach us on X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. And the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. Holyrood Distillery has a production capacity of 250,000 liters of spirit annually, as we heard from Rob Carpenter. But let's put that into comparison. Edinburgh has long been considered a, quote, small distillery, but according to the Malt Whiskey Yearbook, its annual capacity is 300,000 liters. Compared to Wolfburn, Nickneen, and Daftmill, Holyrood is almost a giant. All three produce less than 100,000 liters of spirit each year. On the other hand, there are around 113 malt distilleries in Scotland capable of making more than 1 million liters of spirit annually. Glenfiddich and the Glenlivet are tied for the top spot at 21 million liters of spirit a year. In other words, they produce in about a week what Holyrood makes in an entire year. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from your app store. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Dewar's Double Double 38-year-old blended malt has arrived, and it's a true gem for collectors. Secure a bottle, and you'll be adding a rare piece of history to your collection.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.